1. Savon Blue. Don't be so edgy. Relax. Okay. 1. The third morning of our life on Wet Crow's Feather Island was just greeting us. I awoke in a daze, trying to distinguish between the dreams I had just had and the reality yet to come. The high, rectangular window admitted just a bit of light, so the room still remained dim. Since the room had no lights, I would just have to wait for it to get brighter. The sun had only just risen, and it was maybe around 6 a.m., judging by my internal clock. I suspect this way of determining the time has no more than a 15-minute margin of error, but even supposing I was an hour off, it's not like it would be a problem. Getting up, I mumbled, and slowly rose from bed. The room was mostly empty, its only furnishings a chair and a futon. Aside from that, it was completely bare. Its high ceilings gave it an even more spacious feel, and that hollow, dead atmosphere that evokes so vividly images of solitary confinement or something. I couldn't help but feel a little bit like an inmate on death row. It was the second time in my life I'd woken up with that feeling. But while this was in fact not solitary confinement, neither was it originally a bedroom. It was formerly a storage space. When I asked Akari to show me the smallest room in the mansion, this was where she brought me, the smallest room. Even so, it was infinitely bigger than my room at the lodging house. Boy, was that ever depressing. Not its way beyond depressing, I said to myself. Now then, I switched my cognitive channel from death row inmate mode to routine mode. Wondering what time it really was, I glanced at my wristwatch, but the LCD screen displayed nothing. Maybe the batteries had died while I was sleeping. But wait, I'd changed them just a little while ago. There had to be some other problem. Well, I could always ask Kunasiga to fix it. Clearing my sleep-fogged mind, I did a couple of simple stretches and then left the room. I walked around for a while. The carpet was thick, bright red, and looked like, and most probably was, super high quality. It eventually led to the spiral case, which is where I bumped into Riai-san and Akari-san. Oh, good morning. You two are up early. It was only common courtesy to greet them, but they simply passed by with no more acknowledgement than a silent head bow. Guess they're the quiet type, I muttered to myself. But to be fair, they were probably working, and I wasn't exactly a guest, per se, so I just had to live with their lukewarm response. If I expected anything more out of them, I'd have to throw my arms out wide and cry out, "How you feelin', my freaky people?" And, frankly, I just didn't have the energy. Handa Riai-san and Chiga Akari-san were maids employed at the mansion. Riai-san was the head maid, Akari her subordinate, and there were 2 other maids at the mansion, of the same rank as Akari-san, a total of 4 maids. Considering who owned the mansion, and the size of the mansion, it seemed as if a staff of 4 maids would be too small, but these women carried out their duties with the swiftness and skill of true specialists. The mistress of the mansion, and the person these maids served, was Akagami Iria. She was the proprietress of the island, as well as the mansion, and furthermore, she was the one who had invited me and Kunasiga here. But wait, was I actually invited? I asked myself. Now just how old was Akari-san? You could tell just by looking at Riai-san that she was probably in her late 20s. It's not easy for kids like me to tell exactly how old a woman that age is, but that's definitely the impression I got from her. Akari-san was the real challenge. I didn't think she was younger than me, but still, she looked ridiculously young. She was one of those women you see downtown who can get away with paying half price for everything when they're actually adults. As I went up the spiral staircase and headed down the second-floor hall, my mind filled with nonsense. Maybe she has a thing for young guys. Yeah, just babbling. I was headed for Kunasiga's room. 2 days ago, when we arrived at the island, a room had of course been prepared for Kunasiga, but not for me. This was to be expected. Even I had had no idea I would be visiting this weird little island until that very morning, when Kunasiga called me. Akari-san prepared a room for me at the last minute, but I'd politely refused it. Why? The reason hit me as soon as I opened the door. I knocked once, then went ahead and opened it. The interior was vast. Pure white carpet and pure white wallpaper complemented pure white furniture. Even I knew that white reflects light. Kunasiga was crazy about the color white, so somebody had decorated his room this way deliberately. In the center of the room was a luxurious sofa and a wooden table. A chandelier hung from the strangely high ceiling. The bed was like something straight out of a movie set in medieval times. It even had a canopy. Yeah, I'd never get any sleep here, and so I had Akari-san show me to the storage room on the first floor. Meanwhile Kunasiga, lacking my more delicate sensibilities, lay there drowsily on her pure white sheets, looking at the enormous, antique, mechanical clock on her wall, also a verso thoughtfully selected in white. I saw that it was, in fact, 6 o'clock, just as I guessed. Pondering what to do now, I sat on the side of her bed, enjoying the feeling of the thick, fluffy carpet beneath my feet. Kunasiga rolled over, her eyes opened, just slightly. Oh, Tu-chan. Somehow she had sensed it was me, but at any rate she seemed to be awake. She pushed her Hawaiian blue hair away from her face and regarded me with sleepy eyes. Oh, Tu-chan, you came to wake me up, didn't you? Thank you. Actually I came here to tuck you in. But what's this, Toma sleeping at night time? That's pretty rare. Or did you just get to bed? If that was the case I'd have to apologize. She shook her head. I think I slept for 3 hours. 'Cause yesterday, well, some stuff happened. Tu-chan, give me 5 more seconds. Good morning. It's a bright, brisk morning, isn't it? She sat up, her petite little body popping up, flashing me an ear-to-ear grin. She struck a dynamic pose. Hey, it's not bright out at all. I don't like this. I like for the sun to be way high up in the sky when I wake up in the morning. You're talking about the afternoon? Either way, that was some good sleep. Ignoring me, she kept on talking. I'm pretty sure I got to bed at 3 a.m. Some really bad stuff happened yesterday and I just huffed off to bed. 'Cause sleep is the best thing when you're feeling really terrible. It's like sleep is the one and only gift of salvation God gave mankind. Now, Tu-chan, yeah, Tomo, stay still for a sec. Without even giving me time to be confused, she hugged me, or to put it more accurately, she draped herself on me, burdening me with the entirety of her body weight. She rested her tiny head on my right shoulder, with our bodies stuck together, her slender arms wrapped around my neck. Squeeze. Not that she was heavy. Kunasiga, recharging. Evidently she was recharging. Thus, no moving allowed. I gave up on the idea of resistance and supported her weight. But hey, what was I, an electrical outlet or something? Looking at Kunasiga, I noticed she had slept with her coat on. As far as I knew, she wore it all the time, indoors and outdoors, summer and winter. A jet black men's coat. On a girl of Kunasiga's tiny stature, the large-sized coat easily touched the floor, but she seemed to be madly in love with it anyway. I had told her millions of times to at least take it off when she's sleeping, but to no avail. One thing was for sure, Kunasiga Tomo did things her own way. In that sense, she was kind of like me. Okay, thanks, she said, and finally let go of me. Battery full. Now, let's go face another day. With a grunt she rose from bed, blue hair bouncing. She walked over to the computers by the window opposite her bed. They were the 3 computers she had brought from her home in Shirosaki. All 3 were tower models. The 2 on the left and right were of typical size. The one in the middle was exceptionally large. They were all white, of course. I just didn't get why she was sewn to a color that was so easy to get dirty. The 3 computers were on a U-shaped rack, with a cushiony rolling chair in the center. Kunasiga plopped down in the chair and leaned back. That way she could simultaneously control all 3 computers, but no matter how you counted it up, she still had only 2 hands. Why she would ever think to use 3 keyboards at the same time was beyond me. I looked over her shoulder. The 3 keyboards were neither ASCII nor JIS nor Oasis, but instead some weird, mysterious key alignment. But to question the unnaturalness of it would be futile. For an engineering whiz like Kunasiga Tomo, designing a keyboard from scratch was probably like a walk in the park. Incidentally, Kunasiga didn't use a mouse, because they're a total waste of time, she would say. But to a novice like me, The sight of a mouseless computer was unnerving, just totally impossible to get used to. Not that that's the worst feeling in the world. 2chan, yet tie my hair up. Got it. I went up to her chair. I slipped some hair bands off her arm and tied her hair into 2 braids. Man, wash your hair already. My fingers are getting oily here. I hate taking baths, 'cause you know, your hair gets all wet and stuff. Well, of course. Look at this. The blue's getting dark. I can't see my own head. Hell, if I leave it like it is, it'll turn ultramarine. Thank you, 2chan, she said, biting her lower lip with a giggle. I just looked back at her with an innocent, confused smile. No problem, really. Even as we talked, her fingers never stopped moving. They moved with the accuracy of a machine at a constant rhythm with every keystroke. Her movements flowed so smoothly it was as if she were unconsciously carrying out some pre-planned assignment in some pre-programmed way. Incomprehensible English characters and numbers streamed along on all 3 monitor displays at an unbelievable pace. Tomo, what are you up to, anyway? You just got up, Well, I don't think you'd get it even if I told you. You really need all 3 PCs to do it, I said. She gave me a perplexed look. 2chan, this one in the middle isn't a PC, it's a workstation, she said. What's a workstation? It's not a PC. Nope, it's different. Well, I guess PCs and workstations are similar in that they're both intended for individual use, but it's like, workstations are way more top of the line. So a workstation is like a super good PC, I said, openly displaying my ignorance. She groaned. 2chan, a PC is a PC and a workstation is a workstation. They're both GPCs, but think of them as 2 completely different things. What's a GPC? She looked at me as if I were some kind of a caveman. 2chan, you don't know anything, do you? She said with a touch of disbelief. What exactly were you doing in Houston those 5 years? Other things, she sighed. Okay, she said, tilting her head. Then she resumed her work as if a switch had been toggled in her brain. Letters and numbers that looked like hocus pocus to me continued to stream by on the displays. I wanted her to tell me a little more about the different classifications or what have you, but I'm not really that intellectually curious. Besides, it would be rude to interrupt whatever she was working on. For an outsider like me to try to follow this nerdy cupcake's explanation seemed as if it would just lead to a headache. So with that I ended the discussion. I massaged her shoulders for a bit, then decided to borrow her sink, where I washed my face and changed my clothes. Hey, Tomo, I'm gonna go for a walk. Without looking up from her work, she gave me a half-hearted wave. The other hand kept on tapping keys. I shrugged and left the room too. I'd be lying if I said I knew all that much about the Akagami Foundation. They're not exactly the most well-publicized organization in the world. Plus, since they mostly operated out of the Kanto region, someone like me who was born in Kobe, grew up in Houston, Texas, and lived in Kyoto wouldn't know that much about them. Putting it simply, the Akagami Mansion was the home to a storied legacy of business barons. That business might have been some kind of trade, or a system in which money just poured in on its own. I'm not sure what exactly it is that they did, but whatever it was, one thing was for sure. The Akagami Foundation was loaded, holding property not just in Japan but all over the world. The Akagami Foundation was the owner of Wet Crow's Feather Island as well, and the owner of the Western-style mansion found in the center of the island was none other than Akagami Iria. As you might guess from her name, Iria was related to the head of the Akagami Foundation, his granddaughter. In fact, she was a born and bred pedigreed princess, for whom no obsequious praise was too obsequious. Over time, she had inherited vast amounts of enormous wealth and unbelievable power and ruled over a great many underlings. But then, the head of the foundation himself had completely cut her off. So maybe this is all really better expressed in the past tense. Cut off. I don't know what she did to deserve it, but it must have been something big. Supposedly she was permanently removed from the family 5 years ago, at the age of 16. At that time, the head of the family left her with a small severance package, which was probably still an unimaginable sum to a regular Joe like me, and this island, floating around in the Sea of Japan. In other words, she had been exiled. Maybe these days that seems old-fashioned, but far be it for me to bend to other people's ways of doing things, especially if those people belong to a powerful institution that's practically its own world in and of itself. Anyway, Iria had spent the last 5 years here with her 4 maids, not once setting foot off the island. 5 years on this god-forsaken island in the middle of nowhere, with no amusements, no nothing. In a sense, it was life in hell, though I would speculate that, in a different sense, it was also a little like life in heaven. But was Iria-san lonely or bored? Indeed, you could say Kunasiga had been invited to the island to stave off Iria's boredom, but it wasn't just Kunasiga. In the same way, it would be no exaggeration to say that Akane-san, Maki-san, Yayoi-san, and Kanami-san had all been brought here for the same purpose. Well, okay, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration. So, anyway, forbidden to leave the island, Iria-san said, well, if that's how it is, and proceeded to invite, as her guests, the world's most prominent figures. Now, prominent figures sounds a little weird, let me try putting it another way. Iria had decided to invite so-called geniuses to her mansion. It was a simple plan. If I can't go to them, they can come to me, famous and unknown alike. All those who possessed genuine talent and amazing skill were summoned by Iria-san, one after another, and, of course, all expenses, including accommodations, were covered by Iria-san. In fact, visitors to the island were often given money, so it was pretty much always a win-win situation for them. To me, it seemed like Iria-san was going for that whole ancient Greek salon image, collecting and cavorting with all these artists and geniuses, and thereby living a fruitful life. To be sure, it wasn't the most typical idea around, but yes, there was something amazing about it. Aside from the mansion and the forest, the island was essentially empty, almost a desert island, and for those world-weary men and women of talent who needed to rest both the body and the mind, it was the perfect place. And thus had Iria-san's plan been a tremendous success. Now then, walking around aimlessly on this empty island, basking in the forest, it was by an extremely distant cherry blossom tree that I suddenly ran into Shinai-san. Oh, that is, I mean, Shinai-san said, waving a hand to greet me. You're quite the early bird there, Mr. What was your name again? Sorry, my memory's a little weak. Why see, he had a good 4 inches on me, and his designer clothes were much better than mine. His expression was mild-mannered, his way of speaking was mild-mannered, and so was, somehow, his clothing and stature. But whether or not Shinai-san really was mild-mannered, I couldn't say. I don't have the skill to judge someone just based on their appearance, and I'm the last person to jump to conclusions after knowing someone for just a couple of days. I don't believe I ever told you, I answered with a shrug. I'm just Kunasiga Toma's sidekick. No need for a sidekick to have a name, am I right? That's awfully modest of you. Not that it's any wonder, being on this island, but speaking of sidekicks, I suppose I'm in the same boat as you, Shinai-san said and smirked. Yes, Shinai-san and I were no more than tag-alongs. It probably goes without saying at this point, but I wasn't here walking around on this island because I was any kind of genius. Kunasiga Toma was the genius here, and I was nothing more than her attendant. If she hadn't said to me, "Tu-chan, it turns out I'll be going to some island, so come with me, Kay." Right about now I would have been in my Kyoto 4 tatami-sized room getting ready for school, no question about it. The main character here is Kunasiga Tomo, let's just make that clear. Now then, as for who Shinai-san was accompanying, well, she was right under the cherry blossom tree, with those thoughtful, thoughtless eyes. She gazed at the fluttering cherry blossom petals. She had blue eyes and hair of gold. Her dress, pale in color, was out of some French movie, and was accented with dazzling jewelry. Just one of her necklaces or bracelets was likely worth more than my liver. Even if I sold off every part of my body I still couldn't pay for it. Ibuki Kanami, one of the geniuses, having, supposedly, suffered problems with her legs from birth, she was confined to a wheelchair, and thus Shania-san, as her caretaker, had tagged along on the trip. As I'd heard it, until a few years ago, she had also been totally blind. Her blue eyes were not a sign of foreign blood. Kanami-san was a painter. Even I, without the slightest knowledge of that field whatsoever, had heard of her. She had earned a reputation as a painter who possessed no single style. I had never actually seen any of Kanami-san's paintings, but I thought that maybe she was gazing at the cherry blossoms in that way so as to later portray them on canvas. What's she doing? As you can see, she's watching the cherry blossoms. It won't be long before the petals start falling. She has a fondness for the moment just before death, if you will, the ephemeral things in life. Most of the trees on the island were just your standard fare, but for some reason, there was one cherry blossom tree. It looked quite old, and the fact that there was only one on the whole island was nothing short of bizarre. Most likely, Irie-san had transplanted it here, so they say dead bodies are buried under cherry blossom trees. How dreadful. Ouch. I was just trying to make conversation, but instead ended it in one fell swoop. Of course, it was pretty dreadful. Just joking. Shania-san laughed. Personally, I think it would make more sense if that legend was about a plum tree, but then I guess it wouldn't be a legend, but a myth. Ha. By the way, boy, have you gotten accustomed to the island yet? This is your third day here, right? How long were you planning to stay again? A week. So we have another few days. That's too bad, he said, with a tinge of mystery. What's too bad? Oh, it's just that I hear Irie-san's favorite will be coming here in a week. But if you're leaving in 4 days, you'll just miss each other, won't you? That's just too bad. Oh, I see. I nodded and thought about it for a moment. Irie-san's favorite, in other words, the genius of geniuses, a chef, a fortune teller, a scholar, an artist, and an engineer. What could be next? Well, I haven't heard any specifics myself, but apparently this person is capable of just about anything. Not a specialist, but a generalist. Hikari-san tells me this person is as sharp as a tack and full of knowledge, and has lightning reflexes. Yet another totally amazing person. Let's assume it was just some ridiculously over-the-top rumor. The fact that such a rumor even existed suggested that this particular genius wasn't just anyone. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. Couldn't hurt to meet this person, I guess. What do you say to asking for an extension on your visit? I'm sure Irie-san would more than welcome you. Sounds nice and all, but I probably looked less than excited. To be honest, this island is a little stifling. For a regular kid like me, I said. Shania-san guffawed boisterously. Now there, lad, is that how it is? Kanami-san and Akane-san and all of them haven't given you a complex, have they? A complex? Even supposing it wasn't something you could put so bluntly, what I felt was certainly something similar. Shania-san gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. There's no reason to feel inferior to that lot, right? Let's keep it together, brother. Whether it be Kanami-san glanced up from under the cherry blossom tree, whether it be Akane-san, Yayoi-san, or even Kunosigurchin, if they were to play the two of us in rock paper scissors, they would only win 1 out of 3 times. I suppose Maki-san would be an exception there, but nevertheless, that's a pretty blunt way to put it. Not to mention Shania-san had just referred to his own employer as part of that lot. I'm not saying they were at each other's throats or anything, but maybe Shania-san and Kanami-san weren't quite the best of friends. Talent isn't such a big deal. In fact, I, for one, am glad I don't have any. Talent isn't worth spit. Why is that? If you've got a talent, you've got to exert effort. Being ordinary is a breeze. Having nothing to master is an advantage, if you ask me, Shania-san said with a cynical shrug. I think we got a little off topic. Anyway, I don't think it would be a terrible thing if you were able to extend your stay, if you ask me. And hey, just maybe this generalist will beat us in rock paper scissors all 3 times. Well, I'll talk it over with Kunasiga. It would hardly be right for the tagalong to decide something like this on his own. I thought so, he said. You're a lot like me, he said. looking me in the eye. His gaze was deeply disconcerting. It gave me that uncomfortable feeling you get when you're being watched. Me and you, alike? How do you mean? In what way? Don't sound so happy about it. In particular, you're practically identical in holding the idea that you yourself are a part of the world. Seemingly with no intention of explaining himself any further, he broke his gaze and looked back at Kanami-san. Predictably, Kanami-san was still staring at the cherry blossoms with complete concentration. She was surrounded by a sort of transcendence, as if just that one spot was isolated from the rest of the world. She had the air of being unapproachable, even sacred. So Kanami-san's been painting even since coming here. Well, it's more like she came to this island to paint. That's really all she does. After all, I suppose you could say she lives to paint. Can you believe it? He spoke with a tinge of frustration, but if you took his words at face value, it sounded like an incredibly enviable existence, a life where what you want to do and what you have to do are directly connected. It was a way of life I could never even hope for. I, who had discovered neither what I wanted nor what I had to do. I noticed that Shinaya-san was watching me with a wicked smile, like he had just remembered a bad prank. I recoiled a little. I was getting a bad feeling, like a premonition. And then Shinaya-san, with a look on his face as if to say, "I've just had a revelation from God," clapped his hands deliberately. "That's right. It's such a prime opportunity, so why don't you try modeling?" He set me aside as I stood at a loss for words and unable to comprehend his, and faced Kanami-san. "Hey," he called. "Kanami, this fella here says he wants to be your model." "Wait." Shinaya-san, finally grasping the situation, I spun in front of him. "I can't just, give me a break. Now, why are you so embarrassed? That hardly suits your character." "I don't think so. Asking Kanami-san to paint me? That was an incredibly intimidating idea." But Shinaya-san blew off my protest with a simple now, don't be shy, and waited for an answer from Kanami-san. Kanami-san adjusted the direction of her wheelchair and took a look at me. She scanned me up and down, from the tip of my head to the tips of my feet, observing me, assessing me, and said, "So you want me to paint you?" She sounded truly irritated. This was a difficult question to answer. With someone as talented as Kanami-san, the simple act of hesitating would have been rude. I was weak in these situations, a real pushover. A 19-year-old boy who spent his life going with the flow has not the power to alter the flow of a tale. "Yes, absolutely, if you don't mind," I said. Kanami-san simply looked disinterested. "Fine then, come by the atelier this afternoon," she said, and swiveled her wheelchair back toward the cherry blossoms. She spoke with heartfelt apathy, but at least she had taken pity on me. "Well, that's settled then. Are you free this afternoon?" Shinaya-san said, strangely joyful. I told him I was free and decided to get going before I got into any more trouble. I returned to the mansion and visited Kunasiga's room once again. Kunasiga was just as I had left her, sitting in her revolving chair, her 3 PCs, 2 PCs and 1 workstation, in front of her. Right now she was focused on the workstation, and the 2 PCs had their power switched off. "What were you up to, Tomo?" No reply. I went up to her from behind and tugged both her braids. "OWW," she uttered in a strange voice, seeming to at last notice my presence. Without changing her position, she gaped at me in bewilderment. Surely I appeared upside down in her eyes. "Yoo, To-chan, you're back from your walk, yeah? Well, say, is that a Mac?" The monitor on the workstation opposite Kunasiga was displaying some kind of Mac OS screen. As far as I had heard, Mac OS only worked on Macs. "Yeah, it's Mac OS. Why see, there are some applications that only run on Mac OS, so I'm running it on a virtual machine." Virtual machine. Basically I'm making the workstation think there's a Mac inside it. In other words, I'm tricking the software. Of course Windows is in here, too. Most OSs are installed on this workstation, so it can do anything. I didn't really get it. This is a dumb question, but how are Mac and Windows different, anyway? She gave my truly amateurish question a moment's thought. They're different because different people use them, she answered, with an air of precision. Well, yeah, that's true, but, well, forget about that. So an OS is like the core software, right? I think that's right. So then it's like this computer has multiple personalities. It's a strange metaphor, but you could say that. So then that PC, workstation, what's its core OS? Like with multiple personalities you have a main personality, right? Geocide, never heard of that. Is it like Unix? That's Unix, with a U sound. Come on, you studied abroad, you should know not to pronounce the alphabet like Romanized Japanese. To-chan, it makes you sound so stupid. Well, it is compatible with Unix, but it's an original OS developed by a friend of yours truly, a friend, Kunasiga's friend. The only friend of Kunasiga's who could have developed an original operating system was someone from the team, from the notorious team, several years back, in the last century, during the time when the Japanese network was still underdeveloped. That group appeared, or, no, appeared isn't the correct expression. They never for an instant let their visage, nor their shadow, nor even their smell grace the public eye. They never announced their name. Whatever name they had ever been known by had been applied by others. Whether you called them a virtual club, cyber terrorists, a crack unit, or a gang that made mountains out of molehills, it didn't matter to them, and they probably wouldn't respond. They were completely peerless, species unknown. How many people were there, and just what types of people comprised this team? These things were all shrouded in mystery. And what did they do? Everything. They did everything. That was all you could say about it. They did so much of everything. There was nothing they didn't do. They wreaked havoc, and more havoc. I wasn't in Japan at the time, so I didn't get to see it firsthand, but they say it was such full-on, ludicrous havoc that it was practically refreshing, lending no hint as to their motives or aims. Beginning with pure hacking and cracking, they also had their hands in corporate advising and fixer fraud. It's also quietly speculated that, back then, they controlled a number of large corporations, but you couldn't say they existed solely as a nuisance. For better or worse, it was thanks to them that the overall level of network technology improved drastically. You could even say they forced it. If you looked at it through a fine-toothed comb, sure there were losses, but in the big picture, the gains outweighed them tenfold. But, of course, the fat cats upstairs saw them as little more than pesky, law-breaking criminals, a hacking, cracking eyesore. Thus the team went on, despised and pursued, but they were never caught, and exactly what they were doing was never brought to light. Then, sometime last year, suddenly and without anything in particular having happened, they were never heard from again. It was as though they had just burned out and vanished. Yo, what's wrong, To-chan? You're quiet all of a sudden. No, nothing. She flipped her hair with a giggle. Yeah, I guess it's nothing. It was in the way that the team met what was, in a sense, an anticlimactic end. Who would believe the leader of the now defunct team was this happy-go-lucky girl still in her teens? Exactly who in their right mind would believe something so nonsensical that it couldn't even be mistaken for a sick joke? But if that wasn't the case, Kunasiga wouldn't have been invited to this genius-ridden island. Not as a communication and systems engineering specialist. How could I not have a complex, Shania-san? Huh? Did you say something? Kunasiga glanced up at me for a moment. Just babbling, I said. So Geocide, doesn't that mean Earth murder? Yup. Of all the existing OSs, it's probably the most awesome. Geocide is number one. Even the RASIS is perfect. Sometimes I think you use those big words just to tick me off. What's a RASIS? It's an acronym for reliability, availability, serviceability, integrity, security. But of course, that's in English, she said a bit irritably. Basically it means stability. Of course it requires a high-performance system, but it won't cause errors or anything like that. Man, that Achin really is a genius. How he, Achin, huh? Sounds like you two are pretty close. Jealous? She said with a strangely pleased tone and naughty smirk. It's okay, I like you best of all. Ah, right, appreciate that. I shrugged and tried to change the subject. But if it's such an amazing OS, Why not market it? If it sold like Windows, you'd make a fortune. No can do. You know about increasing returns, right? With an OS this different, we'd never catch up. Business goes beyond skill or talent. Increasing returns. The law of economics that states the more you have, the more you get, which does nothing for what you don't have. It had been a while since I'd studied it, so I didn't remember it very clearly, but to put it simply, once a significantly problematic difference has appeared, it is impossible to bury that difference, whether it be in regards to skill or money. It seemed to make no difference. Besides, Achin was satisfied just by creating G-side. Achin's a very self-satisfied person. Hey, yeah, must be very happy. Even if that wasn't the case, I don't think it would be possible to market it. Even though it's just core software, it requires some pretty outrageous specs. Seriously astronomical figures. Even my machine just barely cuts it. How many gigs is your hard disk? About 100. 100 tera. Different unit. Tera? That's the opposite of pico. So, 1,000 times a gig. Nope. 1,024 times. Nitpicky chick. Man, I've never seen a hard disk like that. To be specific, it's not a hard disk. It's holographic memory. Unlike hard disks, which record data with magnets, this records data onto a surface. It's capable of 1 tera per second rapid transfer. What you'd find on the market is, well, quite a bit slower. This is the kind of media they're using in the development of space technology. She had those kinds of connections, too. She belonged to an altogether dubious community. Of course, this goes for the machine's capacity as well. But if the motherboard specs aren't customized homebrew as well, you're probably out of luck. Achin just makes things without considering any of the surrounding circumstances. Why see? So they just end up like this. He doesn't try to sue things to other people. Motherboard homebrew? There are people who do that, like yours truly. For one, she indicated herself with her thumb. That's right. She was an engineer, after all. She must have been the culprit providing her teammates with the hardware and software that were to be their main weapons. If you thought about it, it was fairly disturbing. It was one thing to develop a seemingly unmarketable OS like that, but to take it and build your own motherboard for it was just plain freakish. Mr. Earthmurder aside, haven't you ever considered selling this stuff? Like that motherboard you're so proud of? I'm the self-satisfied type. Too, how about you? Chan? I wonder, regardless of talent or lack thereof, in the end all people are classified into two groups, those who pursue and those who create. My own case notwithstanding, Kunasiga was overwhelmingly the latter. Besides, as far as money is concerned, I've got plenty and then some. I'm not thinking about making any more right now. Ah, no wonder. That was true. Kunasiga wasn't in a position that demanded she immediately go into business. It wouldn't be much of an exaggeration to say she spent money like it was water. A 19-year-old occupying a high-class, 2-floor condo in Shirosaki and spending money as fast as she could. I didn't know how many people out there had more money than Kunasiga, but surely no one individual spent as much. Between the Akagami Foundation and the Kunasiga household, who held the greater power was beyond my realm of knowledge, but either way, they both possessed enough of a fortune to enjoy the best things in life and still get change back. That much was certain. Speaking of which, Kunasiga resembled the master of this island, Iria, in that she, too, was semi-exiled from her family. Perhaps they were similar people. In the 3 days I had spent on the island, signs indeed pointed to the contrary, but, well, they were both eccentric, that was for sure. So much so that it would have been impossible for them to blend into any group or be members of any organization. Surely that's how it was, in which case, this island, the meaning of this so-called island of wet crow's feathers. Kunasiga returned to her typing. I'm gonna go have breakfast. What about you? No, thanks, not hungry. It's mating season 2-chan. Go ahead on your own. Eat for me, too. Gotcha, I said, and headed for the dining room 3. Akane-san was in the dining room. I tensed up. She sat alone at the round dining table with her legs crossed in an elegant, somehow un-Japanese pose, having her breakfast. Or no, She had already finished breakfast and was enjoying an after-meal coffee. "Oh, good morning." It was the bright and lively voice of Akari-san in the midst of cleaning the dining room. No, wait, it wasn't her. Akari-san never greeted me bright and lively. That wasn't the Akari-san I knew, which meant, "Hi, Hikari-san," I said, determining that it was Hikari-san. Evidently I was correct, as she then grinned at me about Chiga Akari-san and Chiga Hikari-san. They were sisters, twins, to be sure. There was a third sister as well, their silent younger sister Teruko. Teruko apparently had poor eyesight and was recognizable by her glasses with their black lenses. Akari-san and Hikari-san, however, were perfectly identical, from the length of their hair to their clothes, to the point that they weren't just similar, they were the same. But unlike Akari-san, Hikari-san was an incredibly kind person. Even though I wasn't a true guest, she treated me the same as everyone else. "Breakfast? Wait one moment, please," she said, then spun around and hustled off to the kitchen. She must be so good at spinning because she's small, I thought. With Hikari-san gone, I was suddenly left alone with Akane-san. After a split second's hesitation, I went ahead and took a seat near her. I thought to greet her, but she seemed completely immersed in thought, mumbling to herself in a semi-audible voice, not even looking in my direction. It was as though she hadn't noticed me. What in the world was she thinking about? I pricked my ears to listen in. Sent 96, Puan. Code 84, Puan. Sent, same Puan. Code 87, Puan. Sent 84, Rook. Code 26, Puan. Sent 32, Silver General. Code 95, Puan. Sent 44, Bishop. Code 59, Gold General. Take. Sent 27, Knight, meaning unknown. That's what you get from one of the seven fools. Even the things they mutter to themselves are different, I thought, thoroughly impressed. But listening closely, it sounded like she was reciting a shogi game record. Wow, blind shogi, and by herself, no less. Is this what she always did in the morning? Code 23, pawn, checkmate, sent forfeits, she said, and glanced over at me. Ah, I was wondering who that was, and here it turned out to be you. Good morning, heh heh. Isn't shogi tough? The pieces move around a lot more than in chess. I was playing Code just now. It was a close victory. Huh? There's a cent in Code in single-player shogi? Maybe Akane-san was able to divide her mind like a dolphin. Yeah, it seemed likely for someone like her. Are you good at shogi, or chess? Whichever. I wouldn't say so. No. Is that so? Reading other people's minds isn't my forte? Oh no. I suppose not. You've got that kind of face. She nodded. I saw you from the window a little earlier. Out for a morning walk, were you? Yeah, a walk in the woods. Ah, a walk in the woods. How nice. Very nice. The phytin inside released by the trees creates a bactericidal effect and such. What the hell? In Houston, Texas, in America, there's a research facility called the ER3 system. There, brilliant minds from around America, nay, around the world, gather, and it is referred to as the ultimate bastion of learning, from economics to history, political science to cultural science, physics and advanced mathematics to biology, electronic and systems engineering, metapsychology, indeed, anything that could be called a field of study or research. It's also known as the Comprehensive Research Center. It was a gathering place for those who loved learning and research above all else, a nest for those inhuman humans whose desire for knowledge exceeded even their natural, biological desires, an entirely non-profit organization. They dared not sell their knowledge or research findings, and they were in a sense a closed and introverted sort of secretive organization. There were only 4 basic rules: have no pride, have no principles, have no attachments, no whining. They were to unbegrudgingly cooperate with one another to the fullest of their ability, to never be unproductive, even if the world should perish, and to never quit halfway, come hell or high water. The ultimate destination for those who wanted to do research, who wanted to know, who had to know, with means and end in complete harmony. It was the ER3 system. The people gathered there ranged from highly esteemed college professors to frontline researchers and amateur academics, a truly pride-free assembly of all manner of individuals. Their reputation was seemingly so bizarre that the media ridiculed them as a cultish pack of overeducated loonies, but their research had yielded great rewards: the demystification of trivial nonlinear optics, the overwhelming advancement of volume hologram technology, and the establishment of the near-magical DOP as a sensory technology were all thanks to the ER3, not the work of individuals, but rather team efforts, and non-profit work at that. They declined all awards and other various honors, and thus had not come to draw much attention, but their reputation within the academic world was certainly high. It was a research center with a relatively brief history, not even a century old, but it was already globally networked, and within this research center existed the transcendental group known as the Seven Fools, 7 individuals selected in turn by the selected 7 on the verge of the answers to the universe. They were the true geniuses among geniuses. One of these 7 individuals was Sonoya Muakane-san. She had beautiful black hair, cut ruler precise to lend her an air of intellectualism. She was tall for a woman, with a stylishly slender build. There was no part of her that wasn't overflowing with elegant femininity. She was a Japanese woman scholar of the highest order. The ER3 system is relatively unknown in Japan. The fact that the ER3 itself is so exclusive is no doubt part of the reason for this, but the main reason is likely that the uncategorizable nature of the center doesn't fit with the Japanese way of doing things. But nevertheless, Akane-san had, as a pure and innocent Japanese woman, and in her 20s, no less, risen to the ranks of the ER3's 7 fools. It would come as no surprise if one day she was a household name in Japan. Now, this may all beg the question, if I'm just a pure and innocent Japanese person, too, how come I know so much? But there's no special reason, really. It's not that I'm particularly well informed, it's just that the ER3 and I have crossed paths a bit. You see, in preparation for the long-term, ER3 system implements a study abroad program to educate the youth of the next generation. For 5 years, beginning with my second year of junior high school, I participated in that program, so naturally I knew of Sonoya Muakane's reputation as one of the 7 fools, as well as her above-the-clouds existence, and that's why I was so surprised to discover Akane-san here on this island. I'm not at all the type who surrenders unconditionally at the first sniff of authority or talent, but I can't help but be nervous. What exactly do you say to one of the 7 fools? I was sitting there, all clammed up, when Akane spoke to me. By the way, that blue-haired girl, Kunasiga-chan, I mean, yes, she's just lovely. Last night I had her do some maintenance on my PC. She's incredibly skilled, isn't she? We have techies at ER3 as well, but I've never seen one with such mechanical precision. She made it look like routine work. This may sound rude, but for a moment I wondered if she was really human. I was sure Iria-san would absolutely adore her. Really? I hope she wasn't a bother or anything. She let out a chuckle. You sound like a baby stroller. A baby stroller. Once again I had suffered an unfounded assessment. You mean a babysitter? Well, they both mean the same thing. Yes, a stroller is a kind of carriage. Right. She nodded. For all her evident ability in math and science, it seemed Japanese was not Akane-san's forte. Well, either way, she was no bother at all. Well, then again, she seemed a bit of the socially awkward type. I don't think she listens when people are talking, and as a result, my PC evolved about 2 generations, but that's actually the improved Kunasiga. She used to be terrible to talk to, just starting and stopping whenever she felt like it. It was pretty rough for me. If you want my opinion, I think there's a certain charm to her unapologeticness. I'm not sure I agree on that. Have it your way. Akane-san shrugged. By the way, I also heard from her that you were in the ER program. That blabbermouth had let the cat out of the bag. I thought I told her to keep that quiet. Not that I wasn't fully aware there's no point trying to keep that girl quiet. You should have told me. We could have had quite a chat. I feel as if we've wasted 2 days. I don't suppose you were holding back by any chance? Please don't get me wrong, I'm not such a big deal. No, it's not that. I guess it was just hard to bring up. And also, even though I was in the program, I quit midway through. The program is a 10-year study. I dropped out after my 5th year. From there I returned to Japan and reunited with Kunasiga. Luckily I was already qualified as a high school graduate from my 2nd year in the program, so I was able to transfer directly to Kyoto Rakumikan University. It's still a big deal. Regardless of what a strain it became for you, that's a strain. Regardless of what a strain it became for you, the ER program's entrance exam is a great obstacle to have overcome. You should have a little more pride about your accomplishments. The ER program's entrance exam was unusually difficult. Even in the application guidebook it said, "There are no perks. This does not guarantee your future. No one will come to rescue you. We offer only an environment in which you may sate your intellectual curiosity." Yet still elite candidates from around the world gathered to take the test. So it was true, merely passing the test was something to boast about. But I hadn't completed the program. There's no point if you drop out halfway, and results are everything in this world. Actually, I happen to think everything in this world is a result. Or are you one of those a genius people? She had the slightest bit of sarcasm in her tone. A genius is not a rose. In Japan, you often see people who take pride simply in the effort they give, don't you? I've endured great hardships, regardless of the end results. They say there's merit in effort alone. I think that's a valid outlook. Saying I worked hard is a fine conclusion in and of itself. What I have a problem with is lowlifes who spout absurdities like I could have done that if I wanted, or I couldn't do it because I just wasn't trying, or I said I can do it, but that doesn't mean I will. That's all ridiculous. There really are all sorts of people in this world. I didn't try because I couldn't do it. You know, you've sort of got this world weary quality about you. It's probably just modesty. Bingo. The right part of her lip curled up in a half smile and she produced a pack of cigarettes from her pocket. In graceful, fluid motions, she put one in her mouth and lit it. Wow, you smoke. I'm surprised. Are you the type who doesn't like women who smoke? Well, no, not women particularly. Smoking is bad for your health. You know, health is bad for your smoking. You know, she retorted, slowly exhaling smoke. There's that 7 fools wit, I thought, but she smirked with embarrassment. It's a stupid argument. Don't mind me. It'd be awful if you ended up thinking I was the kind of person, she said. Shall we change the subject? You know, I was actually in Japan all the way through high school. Really, I was a little surprised, but if you thought about it, it was really no mystery. Which high school? Just your average prefectural school. It wasn't particularly well known. I was in the girls' karate club back then. I didn't like it at all at the time, but in retrospect it was really fun. Gee, that takes me back. It's already been more than 10 years. The skirts back then were this long. I didn't have the best grades, but I was good in math and English. That's why I ended up at an overseas university. My family was very against it, but I defied them. After all, don't they say if you love someone, set them ablaze? No, anyway, it was like that. So in the end I cut myself off from my family and crossed over to America on my own. It was a hell of a big move for someone like me back then, and thus she ended up in the 7 Fools. Maybe Cinderella was in this story, too. So you don't like math? I had a feeling. Well, you know, I don't dislike it. In high school I liked how there was always one concrete answer, no vague components, so math was all I did. I like clear-cut things. But in college, at the ER3 system, I came to realize that wasn't necessarily the case. It's just like Shaji or chess. You just have to get a checkmate, but there are an infinite number of ways to get there. I felt as if I had been swindled or something, like when a lover shows an unfamiliar side of themselves to you. She laughed as if to say, a romantic idea, but not exactly. But I was also a little touched. You know, in my high school days, I always figured math wouldn't be of any use once I got into the real world. but in fact there really are cases where you have to use calculus and cubic equations and such. You use factorials in everyday life. I was definitely touched by that fact. I understand. I nodded. I really did. She smiled in a satisfied way. Are you a math person, too? On average, men are much more likely to be mathematically inclined than women, because of the way their brains work. Is that so? Well, based on statistical data, sounds like sexist data to me. Besides, statistical evidence is pretty unreliable. If you roll a die 100 times and it lands on 6 every single time, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a 6 the next time, too. I told her this, but she protested. If it lands on 6 100 times in a row, it's a die that only lands on 6. It's too significant a difference to be written off as a coincidence or leaning odds. Male-female statistics are kind of like that, too, though. Hey, so you're a feminist, or are you just being polite around me? Well, unfortunately I'm not a feminist. Listening to talk about expanding women's rights and women's liberation makes me sick to my stomach. I mean, right, they're obviously spouting nonsense. Sure, it's a man's world, but it's not gender equality we need. It's equal opportunity to apply our abilities. Men and women are so different that you can practically call them genetically separate creatures. So I believe they have separate roles. Of course, that rests on the major assumption that your role and what you want to do are separate, and the minor assumption that if you have to choose between the two, what you want to do should come first. And maybe the medium-sized assumption that you can do what you want to do first. But saying you can't do anything sounds like a convenient excuse to me. There's also the factor of environment. But was there ever an age when women were forbidden from writing, or from sculpting? Regarding recent trends, I've become more inclined to sympathize with men. I feel as if they're closer to my own point of view, but also, until the modern day, the workplace was always exclusively man's domain, right? So it's no wonder they got angry when women wanted to butt in. They were just righting a wrong. That's just tough luck for the men. I wondered why I had to take the feminist stance. She nodded. Maybe you're right. I don't really know, but I can understand why women get angry at men, too. Even though they're just carrying out their roles and we're just carrying out ours, they still act all big about it and put on airs. It's no wonder women get angry, just so long as they don't try to mix me up into anything. I guess what I truly want is for feminists to just get away from me. Whatever the case may be, women are inherently a boring breed, just like you men. Come to think of it, there were more men than women at ER3, too. Within the 7 fools, 5 were men, increasing returns. She seemed taken aback. I'm afraid I don't know that word. What is it? Some kind of dieting thing or something? It means beta loss to VHS. You mean the bias that occurs in economics? That's right. To return the once male bias world to equilibrium, you'd have to go through quite a bit of hardship. Really? There wouldn't be any problems if men and women weren't always acting jealous of each other, but nobody gets it, do they? And yet they claim there's no difference between separation and discrimination. You know, Akane-san, coming from you this all sounds convincing. I guess you must be going through quite a bit of hardship yourself. Never, she said flatly. I just make a little effort. It was a loaded statement. Suddenly I recalled something I had wanted to ask someone ever since I first learned of the 7 Fools' existence at ER3. Say, who's the number 1 smartest person in the entire ER3 system? In other words, who was the smartest person in the world? Akane-san answered with little deliberation. Number 2 is Fräulein Love, and number 1, come on, kid, you expect me to list everyone? Kidding. To answer your question seriously, the person I respect the most, or in other words the person I place above myself and all others, is probably Assistant Professor Hewlett. He is number 1 for sure, almost unspeakably accomplished. He was the single greatest mind of the last century, and probably this one as well. The first and probably last man to master every subject when he was still in his single digits. Granted special criminal immunity by the president, he used his superior intellect to serve the good of the nation. If Akane-san was like a god to me, Assistant Professor Hewlett was the very fabric of the universe. If he had been a woman, he probably would have changed history, she said, looking off into the distance. It was a curious look of admiration. Sorry for the wait. With expert timing, Hikari-san appeared, pushing a cart. On top of it sat my breakfast. With experienced hands, she placed it in front of me, followed by a knife and fork on either side. Please take your time, she said with a bow and radiant smile, and then went off somewhere once more. It seemed she still had lots of work to do. 9 pieces of deep-fried risotto balls on lettuce, fish soup, salad, and a sandwich made with Italian bread, plus coffee. That Sashirano-san is hot stuff, huh? Akane-san muttered, eyeing my meal. Sashirano yoi. She ran the mansion's kitchen, but she wasn't an employee. Indeed, she was one of the geniuses who had been invited to the island, having already been here for over a year. At this point she was the longest-running guest. There was no doubt that many of the elite visitors to the island had come in hopes of trying her cuisine. Officially, her specialty was Western cuisine, but she could just as skillfully do any other type, whether it be Chinese, Japanese, or what have you. She was a cooking master with whom no one in the culinary world wasn't familiar, or so went the tales about her. Personally, I was just as ignorant about cooking as I was about art and academics, so I had sadly not even heard of Yayoi-san until visiting the island, but having the privilege to try her dishes 3 times a day plus between meal snacks, even I came to know of her extraordinary culinary prowess. The typical image that accompanied a first name like Yayoi is either that of a stuck-up know-it-all or a short, spunky girl, but this Yayoi-san fit neither description, instead turning out to be a boisterous and lively woman with short hair, with a polite manner about her. She was the unarrogant type, despite being called a genius. She was also probably the only down-to-earth person on the whole island besides me. Likewise, she was the second most pleasant person to talk to. Incidentally, Hikari-san was first. Nah, I'm just babbling. Word had it that Yayoi-san possessed some power that allowed her to make any food better than any other cook, but just what was it? I was curious to know, but had yet to inquire. She spent most of the day in the kitchen. I think that's what you call a shut-in, so opportunities to speak with her were rare. I noticed that Akane-san was hungrily eyeing my risotto balls. After a moment of my refusing to speak up, she transferred her gaze to me. Something about her eyes was slightly different from before, like those of a carnivore hunting wild game. Have you ever heard that people originally didn't acknowledge any numbers past 7? Well, apparently, all numbers past 7 were simply thought of as a lot. I had also heard in my program training that this was the fundamental reason why the fools were limited to 7 people. Yeah, so just looking at things objectively, if your 9 risotto balls turned into 8, I don't think it would be such a great loss. Anne, you're a sharp guy, huh? A good match for a girl like Kunasiga. It's not like that between us. Don't change the subject. Are you trying to get me to kowtow to you? Fine. Sashirano-san's risotto balls are delicious, so gimme one. You happy? I slid my plate to her without saying anything. Akane-san began to gleefully pop down the risotto balls, one after another. Before you knew it, they were all gone. Apparently by one she meant one plate. Well, I was never one to eat a whole lot in the morning anyway. I was supposed to eat for Kunasiga, too, but it was awfully cruel of her to leave that to me. Switching channels, I made my way to the sandwich and salad. Not to be too generic, it was really good. If you said this was the only kind of food that was served at the island, and all of it free, no less, no genius would decline. Surprisingly, even Akane-san was evidently in the boat. Now then, to get back to the subject you're so slightly avoiding, she said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. If it's not like that between you two, just what is your relationship? If you were just friends, you wouldn't have come to this island together. You have school to worry about. Indeed, by coming to the island I had missed every day of class since the school entrance ceremony. Incidentally, I also missed the entrance ceremony. In other words, well, yeah, I met her before I was in the program, so there's a blank of 5 years, and when you got back she turned out to be a cyber terrorist. Huh? That's a sordid little tale, indeed. I saw it coming even when we were 13 years old. Nevertheless, reuniting with her after my 5 years of study abroad, I was honestly surprised at how little had changed from the old days. Anyone would be surprised to suddenly return to their early teens. Of course, that was just how things seemed. In reality, she had become much more human in terms of personality. Our relationship, asked flat out, it was a tough question to answer. Kunasiga needed me, that much I knew. However, it didn't really have to be me. It would be extremely difficult to explain the circumstances that surrounded us. To do so, I'd have to explain a lot about Kunasiga herself, and I didn't especially want to do that. Akane-san nodded. I haven't talked with Kunasiga-chan all that much, but it seems to me she has too many shortcomings to go through everyday life. I guess I shouldn't say shortcomings. It's not like she's defective, but her focus is just so skewed. It reminds me of my friend whose kid is a savant. Savant, in French, it means a person with wisdom. I was aware that Kunasiga, too, used to be called a savant. I probably knew too much about her, so she probably really does need someone like you looking after her. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, how does that make you feel? I didn't have an answer. It seems like you two have something of a codependent existence. Akane-san continued. Codependent existence. She tilted her head as if to say, haven't you heard the word? It's a symptom of addiction that affects human relationships. Like, for example, let's say there's a recovering alcoholic who has a caretaker by his side. He needs that caretaker, and the caretaker devotedly looks after him. But when the devotion goes to extremes, it's a sign of codependency. They get drunk on serving. You even see mild cases of it in romantic couples. Needless to say, it's not a good thing. You end up putting each other to waste. I'm not going to say you two are like that, but you might want to take care. Sure, few things are as meaningless as prolonging a failed relationship, but still, I'm full of nothing but awe for Kunasiga-chan's talents. Even at ER3 they're using software that she created. They created, rather. But certainly I never imagined I would meet her in a place like this. Why are you on this island anyway? It wasn't like the Seven Fools had the emptiest schedules in the world. No real reason, she said after a few moments' silence. It was a strangely blunt response, and it bothered me a little. But more important, even if you're not the best player, you at least know the rules to shogi and chess, right? Why don't we have a game while we reminisce a little more about ER3? Sure, a shogi challenge with one of the Seven Fools sounded interesting, but not without looking. My memory is famously bad, not the greatest reputation to have, if I do say so myself. If we can change locations, I'm in. I've got a board in my room. It was the first thing I bought when I got back to Japan. I've actually got some work to do this morning. How's this afternoon? Sounds good. Oh wait, I can't. I've already got something. Oh, meeting up with Kunasiga-chan or something. Huh? Well, if that's the case, what can you do? No, with Kanami-san. Boom. Akane-san's expression grew unusually stern. Damn it, I'd forgotten. When I had first arrived on the island, Hikari-san had been kind enough to let me know that Akane-san and Kanami-san were on catastrophically bad terms, but because of my famously bad memory I had forgotten. HMPH, we're pals, so I'll give you a bit of advice. You shouldn't hang around with someone with such a vulgar occupation. Lowering oneself like that is stupid, you know. Akane-san, you really hate Kanami-san, don't you? No. There's no reason for me to embrace any feelings of like or dislike toward that woman, but artists truly are a despicable race. HMPH? Seriously, she banged her hand on the table. There's nothing I hate more than painters. They're the most inferior race in existence. Compared to them, thieves and anti-rapists look like Jesus. All they do is dab a little bit of paint on something with a little brush and they think they're so damn great. A little red, a little blue, and poof. It's a masterpiece. Ha, anybody can do it. It was as if she had turned into another person. It was such an abrupt transformation, It almost made you wonder if a painter had once stolen her research materials or something. "Ah, sorry," she said, returning to her normal self upon noticing my stunned expression. "I guess I got carried away. Not that I'm going to take any of that back, but I know it's no fun listening to someone gripe about someone else. I think I'm going to go cool off," she said, her words racing, then helped herself to the rest of my coffee and made for the door. It seemed she was regretting losing her head like that, even if she wasn't going to take it back. Once I was alone, I let out a sigh. Man, I had been nervous. I'm not that used to holding conversations with people in the first place, much less Sonoyama Okane of the ER37 fools. No sweat, right? Well, aside from that blunder at the very end, we were actually able to hold a much more natural conversation than I would have imagined, so I guess I should have been happy, and maybe, sometime in the next 4 days, I would get to have that game of shogi with her. I let out another sigh, but there was no time to snooze. Having finished breakfast, I decided to pay yet another visit to Kunasiga's room, but not a second later, Maki-san appeared in mid-yawn, fully dressed in outdoor gear, which she complimented with a high ponytail. She looked very much like she had come to this island on vacation. Ba-ba-you-ba-you-ba-you-ba-you-ba, she hummed cheerfully as she strolled over and took a seat by me. "Good morning." "Hello?" No, you gotta say good morning when you greet someone in the morning." "Ah, wait, is it not still morning? You've been up since 6, so it probably feels pretty late to you." "Wow, as for me, I have extraordinarily low blood pressure, so I can't be like you," she said with another big yawn. I gave the usual nod and yup combo. There was no point in asking how she knew when I woke up. I was once again nervous, this time in an entirely different way than when I was with Akane-san. Maki-san. Of course she wasn't just here for the surfing. There was a solid reason for her being on this island. Maki-san's occupation was fortune-telling. Just as Kanami-san was a painting genius and Akane-san was an academic genius, Maki-san was known as a genius in the world of fortune-telling. Now that's a real talent, huh? I thought to myself. That aside, I wasn't a big fan of Maki-san. We had had a bad first impression of each other. "You're a fortune teller? I've never met one of those before. So how does my fortune look?" It's not like I actually cared all that much about my fortune. I just figured that since she was a fortune teller, it was the socially appropriate thing to say. Normally any person would be thrilled to have the conversation turn to their field of expertise. As Churchill once said, "I want to talk about what I know, but people only ask me about what I don't." I just didn't want to be one of those people. That's just an excuse though. But after hearing my question, Maki-san sneered, and said, "Well, give me your year, month, and date of birth, your blood type, and the name of your favorite movie actor," I answered, but all the while wondering what possible connection my favorite actor could have to my fortune, birthday and blood type aside. In any case, I had forgotten my blood type, and I didn't really know a lot of movie actors, for that matter, so I just made some answers up. "Okay, I see. Then, take this," Maki-san said, producing a slip of paper from her pocket and handing it to me, and with that, she left. I opened the paper fortune and took a look. My date of birth along with the blood type and actor I had just given were inscribed on it in mid-show font. "You were tricking me, weren't you?" After that, I went to check with Kunasiga about it. "I figure it's some worn-out magic trick where the pocket has hidden slips of paper with random numbers written on them or something," I said. Kunasiga shook her head. "No way. That might work for playing cards, but for something like this there would have to be too many. Plus, she would have had to look you up beforehand. It's not like she could have guessed you would lie about your blood type and favorite actor." And then Kunasiga gave me the Maki lecture. It seemed that although uneducated folks like myself hadn't heard of her, Maki-san had actually made quite a name for herself in the fortune-telling world. She didn't do those supposedly therapeutic horoscope-style cold readings like you see in magazines, but rather used her skills to advise bigwig politicians and corporate clients, never making much of a spectacle of herself. Himina Maki, Master Fortune Teller. also known as a good self-promoter, I commented. Kunasiga seemed to think of her that way, too. Her catchphrase for her, the telepath who knows the past, the future, human beings, the world, and all inside it. What's a telepath? She's superpowered, she said aloofly. She's got extrasensory perception, huh? Especially, super abilities are divided into the two categories of ESP and PK. What Maki-chan's got is especially, retrocognition, precognition, and telepathy. In translation, retrocognition means she can see the past, precognition means she knows the future, telepathy means she can read your psyche. Wait a sec, I don't follow. Slow down, Tomo. Maki-san is a fortune teller, right? Occupationally, yes, using her special abilities, that's all. Being able to run fast isn't an occupation, right? But being an athlete is. Being good with your hands isn't an occupation, right? But being a craftsman is. Special abilities are just abilities, but fortune telling is an occupation. Ah, I nodded. So Maki-san, yep, she read your thoughts in advance. Even before she asked you those questions, she flashed a bright smile. Superpowers, huh? I muttered softly so as not to be heard by Maki-san, now sitting next to me in the dining room. I recalled my conversation with Kunasiga. Her previous explanation had sounded somewhat convincing, to be sure, but, now, sitting next to the sleepy-eyed, spacey woman, it was really hard to imagine she was a fortune teller. She just seemed like some drowsy chick with low blood pressure. I told you I'm a fortune teller, but you seem to be dissatisfied, she said, suddenly shifting her glance toward me. For some reason, she seemed to be picking on me a little ever since our first encounter. Perhaps you'd like me to go walking around with a black hood and crystal ball. Should I speak to you in vague, cryptic terms about your impending doom? You just take everything at face value, don't you? I don't think that's the case. Yeah, I'll bet. I know all about it, she replied, shaking her head. Well, whatever. You don't matter anyway. I don't matter. Yup. You're the Japanese representative of things that don't matter. In other words, the most unimportant guy in Japan. It was a terrible thing to hear, but I'll give you one piece of advice out of the kindness of my heart. Your impression of me is quite out of line, and that's not all. The ideas you hold about the residents of this island are all out of line, and that includes Kunasiga-chan. More important, it looks like you intentionally adjust all your beliefs when you're talking to other people. That's surely a very comfortable way to live, but I wouldn't call it a wise one, she rattled off at me as she let out another cat-like yawn. For the last 2 days, I had gotten the same earful of gripes every time we met, and I couldn't say she was all that far off the mark, either. Her remarks were so accurate, I wondered if she really was using telepathy. I'll be honest, I found her really creepy. Oh, I'm sorry for being creepy. With that said, she stormed off in the direction of the kitchen, presumably to get her breakfast. 4. So as not to let this opportunity slip through my fingers, I immediately made my way out of the dining room and back to Kunagisa's room. As I expected, she was still face to face with her workstation. It didn't seem right to be such a shut-in while also being a guest in another person's home, but I guess we just had different values. Kunagisa looked back at me. To-chan, welcome back. How was it? Did you run into anyone? Almost everyone. Today I've seen everyone except Haruko-san and Irie-san. Oh yeah, Yaoi-san, too, but having eaten her food, I felt as if I had met her. Well, that's almost perfect. What is your score in the meeting everyone on Wet Crow's Feather Island by mid-morning contest? What a crappy sounding contest. But anyway, there were currently 12 people on the island. Artist Ibuki Kanemi-san, Chef Sashirano Yaoi-san, Sonoyama Akane of the Seven Fools, fortune teller Himina Maki-san, and engineer Kunagisa Tomo. Then there was Sakaki Shinaya and myself, the tag-alongs. Then there were the original residents of the island, starting with Akagami Iria, who owned the island and the mansion, plus head maid Handarai-san and the 3 all-purpose maids, Chiga Akari-san, Chiga Hikari-san, and Chiga Teruko-san, a total of 12 people. In an ordinary-sized house, things would have already gotten quite cramped, but in this oversized palace, there was still an excess of space. That's when I remembered. Hey, Kunagisa, how long were you planning to be here again? Another 4 days. So for a week. Yashinaya-san was asking me about something. I explained to her what Shinaya-san had talked to me about. The rumor about Iria-san's favorite jack of all trades coming to town. Kunagisa, however, seemed uninterested, tuning out the majority of my story. Is that really important? It's all really vague information, so it's hard to say, but I don't think we really need to meet this person. I didn't really come here to meet any geniuses, and I'm not really interested. Well, yeah, but, hey, speaking of that, I've been meaning to ask for a while, why exactly did you come here? If you're not interested in that kind of thing, what were you so interested in? I couldn't figure why someone who hated leaving the house as much as Kunagisa did would accept an invitation like this. She tilted her head a bit, and after a moment's pause said, just 'cause, ain't an answer. There's no particular reason, really. Or are you the type of guy who always needs there to be one for everything? I shrugged. No way. As long as there's a network, it doesn't really matter where I am. Home is the best in the end, though, she said in spite of still being on vacation. Well, whatever. She was just being her usual whimsical self. I didn't particularly mind, and it wasn't like I was supposed to, either. I sprawled myself out on the pure white carpet and stared up at the chandelier on the ceiling. Man, what an unrealistic scene. Then again, if you asked me what would be a realistic scene, I wouldn't know what to say. Kunagisa looked at me sprawled on the floor. Tu-chan, I don't suppose you're bored. I'm bored with life. Now, that's really unattractive. Huh? She laid it right out for me. If you're free, why not read a book? I brought a few. A book? Huh? What you got? A Japanese-English dictionary, the statute books, and a modern Japanese dictionary. Man, bring that stuff in digital form. Who has fun reading that kind of stuff? Oh, right, she does. Half giving up and half fed up, I rolled over. Hatu-chan, your watch is broken, isn't it? I took a look at my watch. That's right. Come to think of it, I had meant to ask her to fix it. After running into so many people this morning, I'd forgotten all about it. Let me see. I'll fix it for you. Here, maybe the battery's dead. She held the watch up to the light. Nope, something else is wrong. Did you bump it into something hard? Anyway, I think it'll be a quick fix. But you know, wristwatches have become sort of an anachronism these days. Most people just get by with their cell phone. Speaking of which, where's yours? I left it at home. You should bring it. That's what makes it a mobile phone. But what if I dropped it? Well, I guess, and it would be out of service here anyway. It would take a phone like yours to get any signal here. Kunagisa uses a phone that receives signals from relay satellites anywhere in the world, even on a deserted island in the middle of nowhere. Her phone didn't know the meaning of the phrase out of service. Of course, it didn't come cheap. It was a terrible waste of money for an antisocialite like Kunagisa, but she wasn't the type to give much thought to such matters. Maybe so. Well, it's not like being an anachronism is a bad thing. She narrowed her big eyes and placed my watch next to the computer rack. Just then there was a knock at the door. Kunagisa showed no response whatsoever, so I had no choice but to open it myself. The visitor was none other than Hikari-san, cleaning supplies in tow. Hello, thanks so much. I invited her in. Yo, Hikari-chan, Sayau. Kunagisa welcomed her with a full-faced grin. Hikari-san responded in likewise fashion. For some reason these two girls were strangely friendly with each other. They just plain got along. It's a rare thing for someone to be able to become so friendly with Kunagisa in such a short period of time, so I couldn't help but be a little surprised. What are you up to, Toma-san? I'm making some game software right now. I'm creating an application that converts text to music. I figured I'd give it to Iria-san as a memento of my visit. What kind of game is that? I said. Well, shall I explain? Okay, so, Tu-chan, what's the longest book you've ever read? I quit halfway through the tale of Genji and Don Quixote. So, Tolstoy's War and Peace. Man, that was long.
Okay, so let's say you converted the whole book into a text document, whether by using a scanner or by typing it all by hand. Then you'd have digital to analog conversion, like where I's do, ro is re, har is me, and so on. If you did that, you end up with a War and Peace song. For that much text, it would probably come out to around an hour, maybe. Of course, in reality it's more complicated than that. The code conversions and sessions and everything have to be wholly consistent, but still, it turns books into music. Sounds fun, right? Well, definitely sounds interesting. Anyway, what programming language are you using? VB. C. Machine language, an extremely basic level coding language. I didn't think anybody used that kind of language these days. Man, it's like you can communicate with the machine like it's just some close buddy of yours. Heh, she laughed, just a little boastfully, seemingly even more ignorant than I about computers. Hikari-san wore an inscrutable expression, not revealing whether she was following the conversation, and said nothing more than wow. Seriously, I said, but what's actually fun about this game? I guess I don't really get it. Making it is fun. It was a solid reason. I couldn't object. Hikari-san listened with apparent interest, but then seemed to remember something. Oh, right. She turned to me. Would it be all right if I cleaned your room later on? I stopped by the storeroom a little earlier, but you were out. Sure, no problem. I sure didn't know what cleaning there was to be done in that room, though. Hikari-san politely thanked me and resumed cleaning Kunagisa's room. After a single sweep of the room, she stopped and crouched to the floor with a sigh. I apologize. I'm just a little exhausted. Why not take a break? No, I'll be fine. Rie-san would get mad anyway. I've said it before, but she's so strict. I'll be fine. I'm peppy. That's my one positive trait. I'm fine. Please forgive me for causing you concern, she said firmly, then exited the room. I let out a sigh. Sure seems to have it tough. Maybe it's just my assumption, but seeing her like that, it seems as if she's bearing an awfully big load on her own. Do you feel a little like you're watching yourself? It's not like that, but you know, I do feel a bit of sympathy for her. She did seem to be miserable. After all, Rie-san and Akari-san seemed to have a distinct division in their heads that this was just work, but Hikari-san didn't seem to be able to mentally process it that way. It was like the concept of work hadn't been figured into her internal circuit. Perhaps there were circumstances surrounding that. As for the other maid, Teruko-san, I wasn't sure what she was thinking, so I couldn't comment. Everybody's suffering through something, Tu-chan, Kunagisa said knowingly. Everybody knows hardship, or even if they don't, they're at least exerting effort somewhere. Hikari-san, your pal Naokun, Akane-chan, everyone. If there's anyone who lives without suffering or exerting effort, it's probably me. 5. After having lunch, I headed for the atelier as promised. Kunagisa claimed, as usual, not to be hungry and headed to bed shortly after noon. She was a chronically sleep-deprived little techie. Wake me for din-din, please. I have to see Iria-chan and stuff, she said. I knocked on the atelier door, waited for a response, then turned the knob. The floors were uncarpeted hardwood. In some ways it reminded me of the art room in my elementary school, except of course that this room wasn't lined with scarred-up desks and there weren't any fake-looking plaster sculptures. It wasn't as big either. The total area of the atelier was probably around half the size of the room Kunagisa was staying in. Welcome, take a seat over there, Kanami-san said, after briefly staring at me in cold silence. Shinai-san must have been in his room or someplace, as Kanami-san was the only person there. I walked past a shelf containing paint and paint supplies and took a seat as told. I faced Kanami-san. Thanks for doing this. I couldn't deny that she was a pretty woman, with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was like one of those well-bred young ladies you see in old films, an intellectual, at that, and even more, she had artistic talent. It was like she had God's favor. No, maybe I can't say that. She had bad legs, and until a few years ago, she couldn't even see. I guess it would be pretty damn low of me in all my able-bodied good fortune to gripe. But on the other hand, Kanami-san herself didn't seem to view her condition as a handicap or disability. God is fair. If I had been able-bodied, It would have conversely been unfair to ordinary people. Legs are just a decoration. Even when I gained my eyesight, my world didn't really change. The world looked just as I'd thought. Natural selection and fate have unusually bad taste. All of these are quotes from Kanami-san's art books. Kanami-san sat in a round, wooden chair just like the one I was sitting in. She was in a dress, so it looked mildly uncomfortable. I noticed. Kanami-san, is that what you wear when you're painting? Are you doubting my fashion sense? Her face grew subtly more stern. It seemed that this was no joke. She was actually miffed. I scrambled to weasel my way out. No, I didn't mean that. I was just thinking your clothes might get dirty. I don't go and change my clothes every time I paint something. Up to now, I've never dirtied my clothes even once while painting. I'm not an idiot. Oh, I see. I guess it was like being an expert calligrapher. In retrospect, getting paint on your clothes is probably a pretty amateur blunder. To Kanami-san, one of the top artists in the entire world, the mere suggestion was probably rude. I shrugged. But is it really okay painting someone like me? What's that supposed to mean? She snapped with the same stern expression. She seemed to be in a pretty awful mood. Or no, maybe this was her default setting. No, it's just that, won't it decrease your worth as an artist? Like, for example, it was probably safe to say that Kunagisa had technological skill like no one else in the world. However, she only ever used that technology for fun. So the number of people who actually acknowledged her as amazing and brilliant was extremely small. Authority comes from results. Not doing and not being able to do the same thing. Apparently that was Kunagisa's case. I figured it was the same with painters. If you just choose your subjects randomly and mess around all the time, it's hard to get other people to acknowledge your worth as an artist. But Kanami-san renounced my ideas. Didn't I just tell you I'm not an idiot? Do you have a brain at all? I don't go around choosing subjects. You know, if you keep your mouth shut, people won't see how stupid you are. So why don't you do just that? My heart sank. I hate that kind of thinking. It makes me want to puke. Oh, there were no good subjects to paint. My model was no good. The environment was all wrong. That's not the kind of subject I should be painting. And it's not just with painters either. Even people who say obnoxiously egotistical things like, oh, this isn't what I want to do. Oh, I don't know what I want to do. Right, yeah, I do, yeah, myself. For God's sakes, she sighed. I hate people who bitch about what they want and don't want to do, putting their own ineptitude on a pedestal. I want to tell them to stop living like pricks. I don't mean they should all die, but they should be more humble. Just paint anything and stop whining all the time. I don't care if it's some boring jerk or a pile of bug guts. I turn it into gorgeous art, regardless of how sweet and pretty she looked. She sure was full of herself. She was so uncompromising that she didn't even forgive others who compromised. Being compared to a pile of bug guts wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but if she could paint that, surely she could paint me. It seemed that making any further thoughtful comments would just end badly, so I decided to stay quiet. I noticed that behind Kanami-san was a canvas. An under-angle view of the cherry blossom tree was drawn on it in pencil. The one she had been looking at this morning with Shania-san. It was so precisely drawn. It was like a monochrome photograph, with about 10 million pixels. No, that's dumb. There was no need to cheapen such an intricate drawing with that kind of metaphor. I pointed to the picture. When did you draw that? This morning. Got a problem. It was early morning when she was observing the tree. That was about 5 hours earlier. In other words, she had drawn this amazingly detailed picture in a mere 5 hours. A drawing like this should have taken at least a week to complete. Without thinking, I shot her a skeptical expression. She grimaced back at me audaciously. Only idiots spend 3 or 4 months doing something you can finish in a week. Idiots are lazy people. And since I'm neither, I did this picture in 3 hours. It doesn't take me any longer than that. Being the pure embodiment of laziness myself, this was painful to hear. It stung. I wished Kunagisa could have heard it, too. Right? Even you have to agree a little, too, right? She said in a cruel tone, demanding my concurrence. I couldn't help but feel as if she were attacking me with a direct insult, and I doubt that was just a false impression. No. Well, I mean yeah, but anyway, you're really good. Yeah, sure, she answered, completely uninterested in my generic praise. It really was an exceedingly bland comment for me to make. In retrospect, you're really good. It sounds like something a 5-year-old would say. So, Kanami-san, you da detail pictures. I da all kinds of pictures, didn't you know? Oh yeah, I put my tooth in my mouth again. The woman before my eyes was Ibuki Kanami-san, the woman artist who denied having any style and took no stance, whether it be detailed or abstract. There was no picture she couldn't or wouldn't paint. She squinted just one eye at me. I don't get hung up on one style. It's not a rule set in stone, but getting too hung up is just plain crazy. It's nuts. If there's one thing in life I want to do as I please, it's painting. You may be right. Unable to argue or concur, I settled with a simple nod. Perhaps able to see through me, she returned my nod with a contemptuous sneer. Hey, have you ever seen my art? Well, a few times in some of your art books, but owing to my ignorance, this is the first time I've seen it directly. And what did you think of it? Not the art book stuff, but that cherry blossom one. To me, Kanami-san's question was a bit of a surprise. I never figured that so-called geniuses cared much about other people's opinions of them. Starting with Sonoyama Akane-san, none of the people at ER3, including that deplorable group of study abroad participants, had any vanity or desire for glory, and nobody cared about how they looked in other people's eyes. I know my worth better than anyone else does. I don't need to sit here and be evaluated by a bunch of brainless slackers. This was their unanimous way of thinking. Probably why I wasn't a big fan of theirs. I said, groping for an answer. Well, it's a very pretty picture. A pretty picture, huh? She repeated my line. You know, there's no need to try and flatter me. I won't get mad. Well, it's just that I don't really have much judgment or a critical eye for this kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's a pretty picture. Pretty. She wore an utterly disappointed expression as she stared at her canvas. She muttered something to herself. Pretty. That's not the kind of compliment you give to art. You don't get it, huh? Damn, I really don't want to do this. What a waste. She let out a heavy sigh, hunched over a bit, and picked up the canvas. She lifted it up over her head, and smashed it into the hardwood floor. The sound of splintering wood. Of course, it wasn't the floor that had broken. Hey, what are you doing? As you can see, I'm disposing of my screw-up. Why did it have to come to this? That decidedly should have been my line. She stared down at the shattered remains of her canvas, a sorrowful expression on her face, and let out another sigh. Geez, it looked like it would have been worth about 20 million one day. 20 million yen, $20 million, different unit. Of course, we're talking about several decades later. Artists can be pretty reckless sometimes. I couldn't help but feel guilty that my crappy comments had invited this disaster. You shouldn't feel like you did something wrong. This is my responsibility. I'm not the kind of imbecile who pushes her own responsibilities onto other people, but I'm just an amateur. You didn't have to do something like that based on the opinion of an amateur. It's not art if you get to pick who looks at it, she insisted. So that's how it was. I could understand that. Her words and her manner were filled to the brim with spitefulness, but to be sure, this woman was an artist to the bone. But it was so realistic. It was just like a photograph. That's not a compliment either, you know. Listen, if you have a habit of complimenting people by saying it's just like blah blah blah, I think you'd better quit it. It's really an insult of the highest order, if you absolutely have to box everything into a style. Though, I guess there's no hope. She turned back toward me. I suppose I can understand why you say it was like a photograph, though, after all, photographs originally spawned from drawings, is that right? Yeah, you didn't know. She raised an eyebrow at me. It seemed saying, you didn't know, was her habit. The person who invented daguerreotype photography was a factual artist. Apparently the study of perspective is related to the invention of the camera. You've heard of the camera obscura, right? Heard of it, yes. The so-called dark chamber, the phenomenon where if you make a hole in one spot on the wall of a pitch-black room, The outside scenery will project onto the opposite wall. It was quite an old technology, dating back to the days of the Roman Empire, and even having been mentioned by Aristotle. Supposedly it was the origin of the camera. It was just one invention used to create accurate images. The main idea behind perspective is to show things the way they really look. That's how the French artist Courbet put it. He also made such realist remarks as "I've never seen an angel, so why would I paint one? It goes against my philosophy." Though, if you get a kid to draw something, it never has any perspective or depth, right? Everything's just displayed in the foreground. The size of objects is also chosen at whim. So for example, a house and a person are the same size, or the most important thing is drawn the biggest. In other words, what they're putting on the canvas isn't what the objects look like, it's how the objects feel. If you believe that drawing pictures is a form of personal expression, then I think that's the correct way to do it. If you think about it like that, a drawing that looks just like a photograph isn't a good drawing at all, is it? Wow, as soon as she had broken out the professional lingo, I lost my grip on what she was talking about, and with all her chit-chat she hadn't even started setting up to paint. When was she planning to get started already? Though truth be told, photographs aren't such an accurate representation of reality either. If you edit a photograph well, it's not hard to fool people. Maybe they're not so different from paintings, in the sense that they're both selective. Kanami-san, were you going to draw me? Right now I'm memorizing. Just as I thought I was about to be called incompetent again, she spoke to me with unexpected gentleness. Maybe you didn't know, I'm the type who has to do her work alone. When I'm with other people my focus goes wacko. She sounded like Leonardo da Vinci. Artists who don't look and paint at the same time weren't the kind of thing you heard about every day, but they weren't the most uncommon thing in the world either, so I wasn't particularly surprised. So when I do portraits, I just have to rely on my memory. You can do that. To me, memory and perception are synonymous. Now she sounded like Hannibal the cannibal. Let's just stay and talk like this for the next 2 hours, then I'll start painting after you leave. After I redo this cherry blossom picture, that is, I want to turn it into something at least you can comprehend. For your painting, I'll need to put down 2 layers of color, so it'll take a little while to draw. I should be able to give it to you tomorrow morning. You'll give it to me? Sure. I don't need that kind of painting. I have no interest in paintings that are finished. I'll sign it, so if you sell it you should be able to make something decent. Of course you could always destroy it if you don't like it, but that seems like a bit of a waste. It should be worth about 50 million. What a materialistic conversation. Sigh. Hey, by the way, I hear you're on bad terms with Akane-san, is that right? That's right. Or really, it's sort of a one-sided hatred on her part. As an individual, as a scholar, as a researcher, as a member of the ER37 Fools, I personally have nothing but goodwill and respect for Sonoyama Akane, but, what's that supposed to mean? She gave a little smirk. As for just plain Sonoyama Akane, I despise her. 2 hours later, after leaving Kanami-san's atelier, I headed for Kunagisa's room. She was in bed, but evidently she had awoken at some point and fixed my watch. In a world-class prank, she had changed the digital face so that the numbers were displayed backward, but at least it seemed to be working. So I stuck it on my left arm, patted the sleeping Kunagisa on the head, said thanks, and headed to Akane-san's room. Play me, she challenged, and then said with a delighted smile, I'll give myself a bigger handicap. With that, she lined her side of the shogi board with chess pieces. It's a Japanese Western compromise, kinda like 2 different martial arts styles. Handicap notwithstanding, I was thoroughly trounced. 7 times in a row.